This is a show with no particular niche, baby. It's always about hanging out. Maybe we'll laugh at some stuff, maybe we'll learn something new, but it's always about hanging out, me and you. Hi, hello, and welcome to That Thing with James. I'm your host, James, and thank you for tuning in. Tuning in for the first time, who knows what. If you're hearing this and or seeing this, you're tuned in, and I thank you for being here. Today is the third and final part of the business plot. No one has said anything. No one has criticized part two, but I've criticized myself a lot for part two. It was a mess. I probably shouldn't have I'm not saying that I shouldn't have recorded the episode altogether. It's just that maybe I would have felt better about the finished product had I just delayed a week, because I was in the middle of a lot of stuff when I recorded that episode, and I had very little sleep, way too much caffeine, and way too much material to look at, and no plan to parse through it. Well, I have done what I'm going to do. I'll say that. I've done what I'm going to do to remedy that problem in this third and final part of the business plot series. If you haven't tuned in to the previous two things, I'll give a quick recap and wrap it up. And after this episode, get back to more silly stuff. Because history, this is not a history podcast. This is a podcast about nothing in particular, about whatever I'm interested in at the moment. And I'm kind of losing interest in the business plot because I know it. You may not know it. That's kind of why I'm doing this, is because you may not know it or may have heard of it and not know much about it. That was the purpose of it. And 3 episodes, this being the third one, 3 parts, is enough. It's enough. So I've got limited resources to pull from here. There's a lot. There are so many threads. This could be an entire podcast on its own, yet I have no interest in making that podcast. So this is just a overview with limited information, limited threads pulling out of all the threads one could pull here. And this is, by the way, this is not a conspiracy theory podcast. This is just a piece of history I knew about that just felt pertinent when I recorded the first part. And, well, I'm a bit of a completionist. I'm not a perfectionist, but I am, I'd say, over 50% a completionist. There are some things, I will DNF. Did not finish some things, games, books, movies, shows. If it's not hitting, then I'm not going to waste my time. I will DNF the thing. This, however, is something I do want to F, as in finish. But before we get into it, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/ThatThingWithJames. There, you can become a patron and get 30 days of access to all 100 and I believe 30 plus bonus episodes of this show. Yeah, well, over 100 bonus episodes. You can get access to it at patreon.com/ThatThingWithJames. And to those of you who are already patrons, thank you so much. You rock. I've also been considering maybe dropping the price just for the hell of it, just to see if anyone would even bite. Right now, the base price is $5. which I think is fair for, the time and labor and experience I've put into this shit, the years I've put into this podcast. But I've been considering dropping it down to, I don't know if Patreon would let me drop it down to $1 because they take like a decent percentage of whatever I make from subscriptions, from patrons. So I don't even know if they would allow me to drop it to $1, maybe $2, maybe $3. Let me know what you think. Should I drop the price? Is it even worth it? Just keep it at $5 and, be fine with having like a few devotees. Let's put it like that. Let me know. But yeah, patreon.com/ThatThingWithJames. The link is written in the episode description along with the show email that I still haven't checked because I've got all anxious about it because it's been so damn long. And socials. I'm not really on TikTok anymore. I was on TikTok. I haven't deleted my account yet, but I don't like... I always assumed I was being, not just me, but all of us, were being spied on. And then Snowden, verified that was already happening with the Patriot Act. And it's just become ever more heavy. And I don't like the idea. And I take whatever measures I can to be difficult to track. And I think at least a little bit, maybe I'm not 100% invisible, but let's say compared to your Aunt Pam who, posts like 5-year-old memes on Facebook, I'm invisible. As evidenced by advertising algorithms don't really know how to advertise to me. And that's by design, baby. That's a sign that I know a little bit of what I'm doing here. So that feels good. That's nice and all. Anywho, yeah, let me get a sip of water. And we will jump right into a quick recap in case you missed it or forgot what the business plot was. And I'm not going to say it's entirely relevant to current affairs. That's for you to determine. I'm just purely sharing an interesting moment in history. And in just a second, I'll be right back. Okay, let's jump in here with a quick overview. Okay, the business plot was also called the Wall Street Putsch, as in the beer hall push, in case you know about that. If not, maybe check out the other episode, other parts, the prior parts, or read about it on your own. Business plot, also called the Wall Street Putsch, PUTSCH, and the White House Putsch, was a political conspiracy in 1933 in the United States to overthrow the government of President Franklin D. Roosevelt and install Smedley Butler as dictator. Butler, a retired Marine Corps Major General, testified under oath that wealthy businessmen were plotting to create a fascist veterans organization with him as its leader and to use it in a coup d'etat to overthrow Roosevelt. In 1934, Butler testified under oath before the United States House of Representatives Special Committee of Un-American Activities, also known as the McCormick-Dickstein Committee, on these revelations. Although no one was prosecuted, the Congressional Committee final report said, quote, "There is no question that these attempts were discussed, were planned, and might have been placed in execution when and if the financial backers deemed it expedient," unquote. Early in the committee's gathering of testimony, most major news media dismissed the plot, with a New York Times editorial criticizing or characterizing it as a quote-unquote gigantic hoax. Fascist overthrow. New York Times editorial. Oh, it's a hoax. Does any of this stuff, like I said in part 2 and part 1, some of this stuff may sound very familiar to you, even in current history and in current times. A lot of this stuff may sound very familiar to you, and that's because, well, it is. This is at least the first attempted fascist coup of the United States, backed by big business, Wall Street, that sort of thing, because fascism is good for business. I've talked about this years ago and time again on this podcast. Fascism is a profitable tool, a profitable way of doing business for capitalists. Okay, let's keep going here. When the committee's final report, wait, hold on, shit, I just closed out so many windows. Hold on. Okay, here we go. When the committee's final report was released, the Times said the committee, quote, purported to report that a 2-month investigation had convinced it that General Butler's story of a fascist march on Washington was alarmingly true, and, ellipsis, also alleged that definite proof had been found that the much publicized fascist march on Washington, which was to have been led by Major General Smedley D. Butler, retired, according to testimony at a hearing, was actually contemplated, unquote. The individuals involved, of course, all denied the existence of a plot. While historians have questioned whether a coup was actually close to execution, most agree that some sort of subversive plan was contemplated and discussed. The players, the financial backers, the interested party who were trying to organize this push, this coup, I discussed in a very messy way in part 2. So I don't even want to jump back into that because I'm trying to finish this thing up here. So let's keep reading here. Background. On July 17th, 1932, thousands of World War I veterans converged on Washington, D.C., set up tent camps, and demanded immediate payment of bonuses due to them, according to the World War Adjusted Compensation Act of 1924. The act stated that bonuses would be paid no earlier than 1925 and no later than 1945. Damn, 2-decade span. Walter W. Waters, a former Army sergeant, led this quote-unquote bonus army. Yada, yada, yada. Reaction to Roosevelt. Okay, so here's the thing. As we all know, the New Deal was a response to the Great Depression. And as maybe not so many of us know, is FDR didn't invent it. He didn't do this out of his largesse, out of nowhere. It was more of a way to survive, way to keep things together. Otherwise, the United States was, and not for the first time, and it wouldn't be for the last time, actually looking at pretty close to a socialist revolution. Socialists, communists, anarchists, labor unions, trade unions. There were a lot of very pissed off people with actionable plans on how to fix this country and how to make life better for the average person. And the New Deal was a way to address those issues, to appease some of those concerns, while also not going quite as far as the activists may have wanted. Okay? So if anything, the New Deal was, undoubtedly a good thing. And it implemented Keynesian, however you want to pronounce it, economics. However, as we all know, Keynesian economics is just like putting a Band-Aid on a cracked dam. It does not resolve the inherent contradictions of capitalism, but it did improve infrastructure and economic conditions for a lot of Americans. But it was, at the end of the day, if you really look at it, it wasn't more of an appeasement than a act of revolution. But even that little bit of appeasement pissed off capitalists so much that they were plotting, quite literally, to overthrow the government, and they were buddy-buddy and already financing the Third Reich and Mussolini's regime as well. Okay? There was a lot of, Adolf was friends with Henry Ford. He idolized Henry Ford. I mean, he idolized a lot of people. The Third Reich actually idolized the United States a lot. And as I've talked about on this show, a lot of the genocide and just racist, oppressive laws they put into place, they took direct inspiration and drafted and did some little revising and editing off of laws that already existed in the United States. Jim Crow laws, laws against Native Americans, they took inspiration from us, okay? So let's keep reading here. Roosevelt's election was upsetting for many conservative businessmen of the time, as his, quote, campaign promise that the government would provide jobs for all the unemployed had the reverse effect of creating a new wave of unemployment by businessmen, frightened by fears of socialism and reckless government spending, unquote. Sound familiar? Some writers have said concerns over the gold standard were also involved. Jules Archer, in The Plot to Seize the White House, wrote that with the end of the gold standard, quote, conservative financiers, that's a word that's been in the news a lot over the past year, were horrified. They viewed a currency not solidly backed by gold as inflationary, undermining both private and business fortunes and leading to national bankruptcy. Roosevelt was damned as a socialist or communist, out to destroy private enterprise by sapping the gold backing of wealth in order to subsidize those dirty, nasty, beggy, needy poors. I added the adjectives, but the poor, unquote. Okay, here we go. Did I already go through this? Yeah, we're just gonna skim through this real quick. November 20th, the special committee investigated, yada, yada, began examining evidence of an alleged plot to seize the White House. On November 24th, the committee released a statement detailing the testimony it had heard and its preliminary findings. On April 15th, 1935, the committee submitted its final report to the House of Representatives. During the committee hearings, Butler testified that Wall Street broker Gerald C. McGuire, a dear old friend of J.P. Morgan family and J.P. Morgan Jr., and a player associated with the J.P. Morgan Chase, and some other people we're going to get into in a minute, attempted to recruit Butler to lead a coup, yada, yada, yada. Let's jump ahead here. There was this part here. Where was it? On the final day of the committee, January 29th, 1935, John L. Spivak published the first of 2 articles in the communist magazine New Masses, revealing portions of testimony to the committee that had been redacted as hearsay. Spivak argued that the plot was part of a plan by J.P. Morgan and other financiers who were coordinating with fascist groups to overthrow Roosevelt. Let's see here. Where was it? Yeah, so there were people, other businessmen and politicians named in this hearing that were redacted as hearsay because, well, they had an influence on this investigative committee itself. But, of course, even now, it's one of those things where if you want to, you could say, it wasn't really anything. And also, if you want to, you could say, well, big business has always had an inherent massive influence on the direction of legislation in these United States of America. But, whatever. Let's keep reading here. I don't think I got to this part before. As a matter of fact, I don't think I did. So let's take a sip of water again and we'll get into it. Hold on. God damn it, and I skipped over this part too. I got to the end part, so we're going to see here how this goes. Butler's testimony in detail. I'm going to try to make it quick. 1933. On July 1st, 1933, Butler met with McGuire and Bill Doyle for the first time. McGuire was a $100 a week bond salesman for Wall Street banking firm Grayson, Murphy and Company, and a member of the Connecticut, it's my way of saying Connecticut, American Legion. Doyle was commander of the Massachusetts American Legion. Butler stated that he was asked to run for national commander of the American Legion. On July 3rd or 4th, Butler held a second meeting with McGuire and Doyle. He stated that they offered to get hundreds of supporters at the American Legion convention to ask for a speech. McGuire left a typewritten speech with Butler that they proposed he read at the convention. Quote, it urged the American Legion Convention to adopt a resolution calling for the United States to return to the gold standard so that when veterans were paid the bonus promised to them, the money they received would not be worthless paper, unquote. The inclusion of this further demand increased Butler's suspicion. By the way, by this point, Butler was already criticizing capitalism. He was already calling war a racket, the United States altogether a racket, a gangster racket. Let's keep reading. Around August 1st, McGuire visited Butler alone. Butler stated that McGuire told him business executive Grayson Murphy underwrote the formation of the American Legion in New York. And Butler told McGuire that the American Legion was, quote, nothing but a strike-breaking outfit, unquote. Oh, he called the Legion a bunch of scabs. Oh, Butler never saw Doyle again. On September 24, McGuire visited Butler's hotel room in Newark. In late September, Butler met with Robert Sterling Clark. Clark was an art collector and an heir to the Singer Corporation fortune. McGuire had known Clark when Clark was a second lieutenant in China during the Boxer Rebellion, where he had been nicknamed, quote, the Millionaire Lieutenant, unquote. During the first half of 1934, McGuire traveled to Europe and mailed postcards to Butler. By the way, this travel to Europe, McGuire went to meet with Mussolini, FYI. There's evidence of this. On March 6th, McGuire wrote, Clark and Clark's attorney a letter describing the croix de feu. What does that mean? I've never seen that word. Oh, fuck. You know it's not good when there's a skull on it. The Croix de Feu was a nationalist French league of the interwar period led by Colonel Francois de la Roque. After it was dissolved, yada, yada, yada. Nationalists, fascists, French fascists. A nationalist French league of the interwar period. Okay, there we go. On August 22nd, Butler met with McGuire at a hotel. The last time Butler met him. According to Butler's account, it was on this occasion that McGuire asked Butler to run a new veterans organization and lead a coup attempt against the president. Butler revealed the story of the plot to Paul Comley French, a Philadelphia Record reporter. Butler also recorded a video I discovered a few weeks ago. He filmed a video himself around like 1934 talking about this. Interesting stuff. On September 13, French, who had once been Butler's personal secretary, met McGuire in his office. McGuire was open about his fascist desires and the plot to take over the government. What a dumbass. In late September, Butler told the VFW, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, so VFW and the American Legion, they're like rivals, okay? I used to, with my parents, go and get like a steak and baked potato Friday nights and watch old people dance at the VFW in my hometown. It was like 99% people, I think, young. You were young if you were 60 in my hometown. Commander James E. Van Zandt, told VFW commander, Butler did, told the commander James E. Van Zandt that co-conspirators would be meeting him at an upcoming VFW convention. On November 20, the McCormick-Dickstein Committee began examining the evidence. French broke the story in the Philadelphia Record and the New York Post on November 21. On March 22, the New York Times wrote its first article on the story and described it as a gigantic hoax. Ad backers, advertisements. So let's dig into here to some contemporaneous reactions. On November 21, I haven't read this part. We're discovering this together, a lot of this stuff. On November 21, 1934, one day into the committee gathering testimony, the New York Times ran an article with the headline, General Butler bears fascist plot to seize government by force, says bond salesman as representative of Wall Street Group asked him to lead army of 500,000 in march on Capitol. Those named make angry denials. Dickstein gets charge. That was the title. By the way, McGuire was 100% he was 100% the fall guy for this. They were all hiding behind him. They being the businessmen and other, politicians in the pocket of businessmen. The Philadelphia Record also reported on the story on November 21 and 22 in 1934. A November 22, 1934 New York Times editorial published just 2 days into the committee testimony dismissed Butler's story as a, quote, gigantic hoax, unquote, and a, quote, bald and unconvincing narrative, unquote. Coming out with a rejection before anything's even been said? Kind of looks guilty, huh? A denial before any accusations really have been set. Interesting. Time magazine reported on December 3rd, 1934, that the committee, quote, alleged that definite proof had been found, yada, yada. We already read that part in the intro. By February 16th, 1935, one day after the committee had released its final report, the New York Times had changed its tone, running on page 1 the headline, quote, asks laws to curb foreign agitators, committee in report to House attacks Nazis as the chief propagandists in nation. State Department acts checks activities of an Italian consul. Plan for march on Capitol is held proved, unquote. The article stated, quote, it also alleged that definite proof had been found that the much publicized fascist march on Washington, which was to have been led by Major General Smedley D. Butler, retired, according to the blah, 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 was actually contemplated. Yada, yada, yada. The committee recalled testimony by General Butler saying he had testified that Gerald C. McGuire had tried to persuade him to accept the leadership of a fascist army, unquote. You know, I wish we could put this story on ice, but it still seems alive, doesn't it? Separately, VFW Commander James E. Van Zandt stated to the press, quote, less than 2 months, unquote, after General Butler warned him, quote, he had been approached by agents of Wall Street to lead a fascist dictatorship in the United States under the guise of a veterans organization, unquote. Later reactions. Hold on. I gotta pee so bad. Hold on a second. I'll be right back. Oh, that feels better. Later reactions to this thing. Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr. said in 1958, quote, most people agreed with Mayor LaGuardia of New York in dismissing it as a cocktail push, unquote. In Schlesinger's summation of the affair in 1958, quote, no doubt, McGuire did have some wild scheme in mind, though the gap between contemplation and execution was considerable, and it can hardly be supposed that the Republic was in much danger, unquote. In 1990, historian Robert F. Burke wrote, quote, at their core, the accusations probably consisted of a mixture of actual attempts at influence peddling by a small core of financiers with ties to veterans organization and the self-serving accusations of Butler against the enemies of his pacifist and populist causes, unquote. Now, when you hear there's no such thing, hold on, let me rephrase. There is no such thing as an unbiased historian. I'll say that. I haven't read about Burke or Schlesinger. You know, I don't know what their angle is. Everyone's got an angle. Even if the angle's no angle. Everyone's got an angle. Everyone has a bias. So, you know. Historian Hans Schmidt wrote, quote, even if Butler was telling the truth, as there seems little reason to doubt it, there remains the unfathomable problem of McGuire's motives and veracity. He may have been working both ends against the middle, as Butler at one point suspected. In any case, McGuire emerged from the HUAC hearings as the inconsequential trickster, whose base dealings could not possibly be taken alone as verifying such a momentous undertaking. If he was acting as an intermediary in a genuine probe or as agent provocateur sent to fool Butler, his employers were at least clever enough to keep their distance and see to it that he self-destructed on the witness stand, unquote. You know, seems like if there were people, you know, using McGuire as their, you know, as their surrogate, as their avatar, they made sure to stay on their own little island so they wouldn't get involved, wouldn't get their, you know, shoes muddy. Prescott Bush. What the fuck is his name doing here? Okay, this is so weird. We're discovering this for the first time. I haven't seen this before. On July 2007, a BBC investigation reported that Prescott Bush, father of U.S. President George H.W. Bush, H.W. used to be a pretty big dude in the CIA, FYI, the Dulles brothers, yada yada, some eugenics laws getting passed in Indiana, which is now trying to once again pass gas chamber laws against, immigrants purportedly. Prescott Bush, father of George H.W. Bush and grandfather of then President George W. Bush, was to have been a quote-unquote key liaison between the 1933 business plotters and the newly emerged Nazi regime in Germany. What? Bush? What? Liaison between the business plotters and the regime? What? This has been disputed by Jonathan Katz as a misconception caused by a clerical research error. According to Katz, quote, get this, Prescott Bush was too involved with the actual Nazis to be involved with something that was so homegrown as the business plot, unquote. Say what? So I had to look this up. And it was hard to find, almost as if it had been scrubbed. But I did find this thing buried from The Guardian, posted 21 years ago. How Bush's grandfather helped Hitler's rise to power. Rumors of a link between the U.S. First family and the Nazi war machine have circulated for decades. Now The Guardian can reveal how repercussions of events that culminated in action under the Trading with the Enemy Act are still being felt by today's president. George Bush's grandfather, I'm reading this stuff here. I didn't write this stuff. I'm just reading what I found here. George Bush's grandfather, the late U.S. Senator Prescott Bush, was a director and shareholder of companies that profited from their involvement with the financial backers of Nazi Germany. The Guardian has also obtained confirmation from newly discovered files in the U.S. National Archives that a firm of which Prescott Bush was a director was involved with the financial architects of Nazism. His business dealings, which continued until his company's assets were seized in 1942 under the Trading with the Enemy Act, has led more than 60 years later to a civil action for damages being brought in Germany against the Bush family by two former slave laborers at Auschwitz, and to a hum of pre-election controversy. The evidence has also prompted one former U.S. Nazi war crimes prosecutor to argue that the late senator's action should have been grounds for prosecution for giving aid and comfort to the enemy. The debate over Prescott Bush's behavior has been bubbling under the surface for some time. There has been a steady internet chatter about the, quote, Bush Nazi, unquote, connection, much of it inaccurate and unfair, but the new documents, many of which were only declassified last year, show that even after America had entered war, and when there was already significant information about the Nazis' plans and policies, He worked for and profited from companies closely involved with the very German businesses that financed Hitler's rise to power. It has also been suggested that the money he made from those dealings helped to establish the Bush family fortune and set up its political dynasty. Remarkably, little of Bush's dealings with Germany has received public scrutiny, partly because of the secret status of the documentation involving him. But now, the multi-billion-dollar legal action for damages by 2 Holocaust survivors against the Bush family and the imminent publication of 3 books on the subject are threatening to make Prescott Bush's business history an uncomfortable issue for his grandson, George W., as he seeks re-election. While there is no suggestion that Prescott Bush was sympathetic to the Nazi cause, the documents reveal that the firm he worked for, Brown Brothers Harriman, BBH, acted as a U.S. base for the German industrialist Fritz Thyssen, who helped finance Hitler in the 1930s before falling out with him at the end of the decade. The Guardian has seen evidence that shows Bush was the director of the New York-based Union Banking Corporation, UBC, that represented Thyssen's U.S. interests, and he continued to work for the bank after America entered the war. Tantalizing. Bush was also on the board of at least one of the companies that formed part of a multinational network of front companies to allow Thyssen to move assets around the world. Thyssen owned the, I hope I'm pronouncing Thyssen right, largest steel and coal company in Germany and grew rich from Hitler's efforts to rearm between the 2 world wars. One of the pillars in Thyssen's international corporate web, UBC, worked exclusively for and was owned by a Thyssen-controlled bank in the Netherlands. More tantalizing are Bush's links to the Consolidated Silesian Steel Company, CSSC, based in mineral-rich Silesia on the German-Polish border. During the war, the company made use of Nazi slave labor from the concentration camps, including Auschwitz. The ownership of CSSC changed hands during several times in the 1930s, but documents from the U.S. National Archive declassified last year link Bush to CSSC, although it's not clear if he and UBC were still involved in the company when Thyssen's American assets were seized in 1942. 3 sets of archives spell out Prescott Bush's involvement. All 3 are readily available thanks to the efficient U.S. archive system and a helpful, dedicated staff at both the Library of Congress in Washington and the National Archives at the University of Maryland. Who knows if nowadays it's so easy to find this stuff because everything's been ripped apart. The first set of files, yada, yada, yada. Third set, yada, yada, yada. Yada, yada, yada. Let's see here. There was another, getting into details here. Red-handed. Jones, whoever that is, recommended that the assets be liquidated for the benefit of the government, but instead UBC was maintained intact and eventually returned to the American shareholders after the war. Some claim that Bush sold his share in UBC after the war for $1.5 million, a huge amount of money at the time. But there is no documentary evidence to support this claim. No further action was ever taken, nor was the investigation continued, despite the fact that UBC was caught red-handed operating an American shell company for the Thyssen family 8 months after America had entered the war, and that this was the bank that had partly financed Hitler's rise to power. The most tantalizing part of the story remains shrouded in mystery, the connection, if any, between Prescott Bush, Thyssen, CSSC, and Auschwitz, so on, so forth. So as I said at the start of this thing, even if ideologically some businessmen, let's say business people, because it's not, financial interests are definitely not limited by gender, race, or creed. Money, 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 money is indiscriminate, as is greed. And even if someone with a lot of heavy money interests may not ideologically align with some, cult of personality types, loud, pooping their pants on camera, that sort of thing, whipping up rallies to, march on Washington, perhaps even have an insurrection at Washington, if that were to happen. Even if money interests don't exactly agree with the philosophies, there's money to be made within fascism. There's always money to be made. And that's why you see even so-called centrists, third way types, softening and not taking strong enough, direct enough action, not even giving strong enough lip service against fascism. Because ultimately, they too, their political careers are financed by the same people financing fascist regimes. Historically speaking, I'm just talking about history here and just, the way this stuff works historically. This, of course, who knows if it's certainly not relevant to now. Who would make that connection? Anyway, 10 U.S. companies that worked with Nazi Germany. I'm going to wrap this up. Here we go. Chase Manhattan Bank, known today as J.P. Morgan Chase, the Chase Manhattan Bank has a spotty history with Nazi Germany. Notably, during the buildup of the Third Reich, Chase Manhattan, with a handful of other U.S. banks, aided the Nazis by helping them raise $20 million for a dollar exchange, a commission from which the bank profited $500,000. To make matters worse, the Rockefeller Foundation, started by Chase's founder J.D. Rockefeller, helped the Nazis by funding their eugenics research. Chase went out of its way to aid the Nazis by targeting Jewish accounts and refugees fleeing the Nazi regime. As a result, French Jews had their accounts frozen, and millions of marks, their version of money, their dollar, were taken from the accounts of fleeing Jewish people between 1936 and 1941. Ford Motors. Oh, Henry Ford. Oh, super anti-Semitic. Those who know of the company's controversial past will undoubtedly be aware of Ford's relationship with the Nazis. For example, Henry Ford never shied away from his relationship with Hitler or downplayed the praise he received. Henry Ford received honors, and even Hitler maintained a portrait of Henry, a rare quote-unquote honor. Decades later, it was discovered Ford Motor factories were exploiting enslaved Russians to work in their factories, specifically in Cologne. Additionally, Ford was part of the AFA, America First Association, first MAGA. Same thing, baby. It hasn't gone away. It has yet to be put on ice. It's still alive. Which advocated the U.S. stay out of World War II, regardless of the conflict and occurring atrocities. Dow Chemical. If there was ever a myth that the Nazi war machine ran on its resources, then its dealings with Dow Chemical prove how much international collaboration occurred. Unsurprisingly, a chemical company had its hands in some black-hearted affairs and provided the Nazis with manufacturing supplies. Raw materials and technology aided the Nazi war machine and efforts, and their success in the field would not have been as potent without the help of Dow Chemical. Coca-Cola, from a company that originally produced a soda with quote-unquote questionable methods, Coca-Cola was a major part in German consumerism up until 1942. Yada yada, skipping through. Woolworth was sold merchandise throughout the United States and Germany, though in limited quantities. During the discovery of Jewish persecution, Americans protested the sale of products from Woolworth, though German citizens protested the removal, seeing it as an insult. Woolworth clarified their position on the affair by firing all of its Jewish workers and were considered an honorary Aryan seller by the Reich. MGM, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, companies were greatly influenced by the market share, and MGM was no exception. An exceptionally popular provider of films for German audiences, said audiences made up a huge portion of their profit and traffic. The German public had a romanticized view of America, as I mentioned earlier, at least through film. And it's one of the key reasons films produced by MGM were wildly popular there. Just as much, MGM didn't mind providing both entertainment and support for the Nazi regime, even after the 1939 invasion of Poland. MGM. Who owns them now? Oh, yeah. Kodak. Though they're known for their scenic pictures and photography, Kodak has a history of Nazi collaboration. Kodak had numerous subsidiaries and businesses in Germany, and while their operations closed during the U.S. war against Nazi Germany, subsidiaries still stationed in Germany were autonomous and continued operations for a profitable sum. They weren't shy about selling photographic and electronic equipment to the Nazis to aid their war effort either. General Electric, household name in the U.S., it also has ties to Nazi Germany. Germany's manufacturing firm Krupp worked closely with GE, exploiting Jewish slave labor and using said slave labor to build the gas chambers found in concentration camps. But once again, profit ruled the motives, as it's estimated GE made around $1.5 million working with Krupp during World War II. Though the United States fined them, it didn't stop their profit venture and revealed a ghoulish degree of inhumanity in the name of profit margins. Cola. Vast quantities of aluminum were manufactured during the course of World War II, and Nazi Germany desperately needed it. Or Alcoa, ALCOA. One of today's largest processors and manufacturers of aluminium had a monopoly on the resource during World War II and readily took advantage of it. Skipping ahead, IBM. The electronic and tech giant is responsible for many innovations in the digital age, but they were also instrumental in carrying out Nazi Germany operations, not just by supplying technology, but methods to track immigrants and trans people. Track Jewish families during the Holocaust. IBM possessed a German subsidiary, Delmag, which provided the Germans with technology and accessible ways to identify Jews and other quote-unquote undesirables. This allowed them to track and log Jewish populations and route them to concentration camps. It was essential in aiding the Nazi regime to carry out the Holocaust efficiently. Maybe we could consult an oracle to see if this sort of thing would ever happen again. You know? Gaze into one of those, things from Lord of the Rings, those gazing orbs, the Palantir, what is it? those orbs that let you see things. Maybe we could see if this sort of thing would ever happen again. I would hope not. I hope this disgusting practice ends up on ice for good. It never has to happen again. That's it for this episode. And that's it for the business plot. Next episode's going to be fun stuff because I need a palate cleanser, and I'm going to start with this week's bonus episode. I don't know what I'm getting into, but I'm going to dig into Reddit for some hopefully silly stories because I could use a laugh. Thank you for tuning in. Hope to catch you next time. Bye.